All right, everyone, settle in. Today, we're going to dive into one of my absolute favorite debates in all of medieval philosophy, the nature of the human will. And look, this isn't just some dusty ancient history. This is about a fundamental conflict that lives inside all of us, the battle between our reason and our desires, our head and our heart. And really, it gets at a question you've probably asked yourself 100 times. What truly makes you tick?
No, seriously, think about it for a second. Have you ever known exactly what the right thing to do was, the smart, logical, responsible thing, and yet you did the complete opposite? Yeah, that little tug of war in your head, that right there, that's the dilemma that fueled a conversation for centuries. And it literally shaped how we in the West think about choice, freedom, and what it even means to be human.
So to really get into this, we have to start with the main event, the concept they were all wrestling with, the voluntas, which is just Latin for the will. Now, this isn't just about, wishing for a pizza. For these thinkers, the will was the very engine of the soul. It was the core power that directs our entire lives and actually puts our choices into motion. Our story really gets going with a guy who just completely changed the game, St. Augustine. And to get why he was such a big deal, you first have to understand the world he was pushing back against, a classical world that had a very, very different picture of what makes people tick. You see, the classical thinkers, the heavy hitters like Plato and Aristotle, they had what we call a very intellectualist view of morality. For them, doing the wrong thing was basically a problem of ignorance. If you messed up, it was because you didn't really understand the good, or you let your emotions get the best of you. The problem was fundamentally a failure of knowledge. But Augustine, and this is based on his own pretty wild life and a ton of self-reflection, comes along and proposes something totally radical. He says, hang on a second, a person can see the right path with crystal clarity, have their emotions totally in check, and still deliberately choose the worst option. This wasn't just a new take, it was a complete revolution in understanding why we do what we do. And for Augustine, this makes the will the absolute center of our moral lives. It's not just a follower of reason anymore. No, it's the faculty we use to actively choose between good and evil. He basically discovers the will as this independent, powerful, and, let's be honest, sometimes really problematic force inside us. So in Augustine's model, the best way to think about the will is as an absolute monarch. It's the king sitting on the throne in your soul, and it does not have to listen to its advisor, reason. It can hear the advice, nod, and then do whatever it wants. And this is huge because it means the real source of sin isn't ignorance, it's a malo, a bad will. Okay, so Augustine's powerful idea of the will as king becomes a cornerstone of Western thought for a long, long time. But now, let's fast forward a few centuries to the 1200s, because a new intellectual challenge shows up and it forces everybody to rethink this whole model. What happens is that Aristotle's works, with their massive emphasis on logic and reason, come flooding back into Europe. And this creates the big question of the day. How on earth do you reconcile Augustine's powerful sovereign will with Aristotle's cool, calculating intellect? This puzzle sparked an incredible debate, led by two of the era's biggest minds, Thomas Aquinas and Bonaventure. Let's start with Aquinas. He's the great systematizer. He looks at will and intellect and doesn't see two rivals fighting for a throne. He wants to build a model where they work together in perfect harmony. And Aquinas' big idea is this. He calls the will a rational appetite. Okay, what does that mean? Think of it like a spiritual hunger. But unlike physical hunger, which might just crave junk food, the will's very nature is to hunger for the good that the intellect points out. It's a hunger that's naturally guided by knowledge. So for him, a choice unfolds in this beautiful, logical dance. Step 1, your intellect sees something and says, hey, that's good. Step 2, your will is naturally drawn towards it. Step 3, the intellect figures out the best way to get that good thing. And finally, step 4, the will pulls the trigger and makes the final choice, what he called the electio. In this dance, reason leads and the will happily follows. So a fantastic way to picture Aquinas' model is like a business partnership. Let's call it intellect and will incorporated. The intellect is the senior partner. It's the strategist who charts the course. The will is the partner who executes that strategy perfectly. They work together seamlessly toward a common goal. But Aquinas wasn't the only one in the room trying to solve this puzzle. His contemporary, Saint Bonaventure, who came from a tradition that was a little more influenced by Augustine, saw this relationship differently. He agreed there's a partnership, for sure, but he had a very different idea about who was really the boss.
Now, don't get me wrong, Bonaventure absolutely thought reason and will were deeply connected. He used this wonderful analogy of an eye and a hand working together to write. You can't do it with this one, right? You need both. So the cooperation wasn't the issue, the hierarchy was. So just to remind you, in Aquinas' view, the intellect does all the heavy lifting of figuring things out, and the will basically signs off on the plan. But for Bonaventure, that wasn't the end of the story. The crucial difference, the whole ballgame for Bonaventure, comes down to one question. Who has the final decisive vote? He argued that, yeah, reason can lay out all the options, it can analyze all the data, and it can make a really strong recommendation, but reason does not cast the final ballot. The will does. And this quote just nails his core insight. After all the thinking and deliberating is done, the definitive judgment is concluded in that place which the will selects. It's the will that gives the final definitive yes. Reason can bring the horse to water, but the will decides if it drinks.
So if Aquinas sees a partnership, Bonaventure sees more of a corporate structure. Reason is your brilliant board of advisors. They bring you all the reports, the charts, the strategic recommendations. But the will is the CEO. It listens to all that advice, but at the end of the day, the CEO has the ultimate executive power to make the final call.
So there we have it, our three models. The will, as a king, a partner, and a CEO. But these aren't just clever metaphors from a philosophy class. Let's zoom out for a second and see why this debate from hundreds of years ago actually matters. A lot. This table gives us a great snapshot of the whole journey. You can see this dramatic arc from Augustine's all-powerful king to Aquinas' harmonious partnership, and finally to Bonaventure's corporate hierarchy with the will as the ultimate CEO. Each one gives us a profoundly different way of looking at ourselves and how we make choices. And that, right there, is the real takeaway. This isn't just a philosophical game. How you see the relationship between what you know and what you want, it fundamentally defines your entire understanding of freedom, of moral responsibility, and even of why we screw up sometimes. Which brings us all the way back to where we started, but now you've got a much better toolkit for thinking about it. So I'll ask you again, when you make a choice, especially a tough one, which of these models feels most true to what's happening inside your own head? You know, thinking about this medieval debate gives us a really powerful lens to examine our own lives. It forces us to ask, are my choices ultimately driven by what I know is right, or by what my will fundamentally decides at once? In today's world, with endless information and so many things pulling at our desires, figuring out if you've got a king, a partner, or a CEO in charge of you might just be the most important philosophical question you can answer.